there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from the Philanthropy Mastermind series, brought to you, of course, by our friends at DonorSearch. And as I've said often, in case you haven't heard me rattle on before, we won't be talking much about DonorSearch today unless our guest chooses to mention them in the context of her presentation or the conversation. But we do want to thank them. They've been providing a platform for these conversations with leaders in philanthropy and fundraising. Now, since 2016, we have well over 550 sessions, and many of those recordings and podcasts are available to you on the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net under the resources tab. I just gave you a lot of information, but that's all to encourage you to look there also for a recording of the session we're about to hold. But don't go away. We want you to be a part of the conversation, and I'm going to make sure that you're a part of that by inviting you to use both the chat and the Q&A throughout. We're going to have a lot of information shared with you in a minute, and then great conversation where we hope you will participate actively. And thank you, Jonathan. You're already getting us underway from Front Royal. You're not too far away from either Jack or myself. So thank you for warming up the chat. And if you all want to just join Jonathan right there, and just let us know maybe where you're from, which part of the country, and we really appreciate that. So, and maybe which organization you're with. And if you have any questions throughout or comments, you can use both the chat and the Q&A for that. Now, with that, I do want to, of course, remind you what this is all about, because we've been asked for a session on this topic often in the survey that you're going to see at the end. Please complete that survey. That's how we knew to do this session. And that's, of course, on faith-based fundraising. And who better to do this than a person who has not only written about this topic, and in fact, just finished another of her numerous degrees in researching this topic just a week ago, but also has written, I don't know how many books, but I can tell you on Amazon, if you just run her name, you will find 56 results. Now, I don't know that she has 56 books, but she's pretty darn close. That is the only Linda Lysakowski, who is one of maybe just over 100 ACFREs in the country. She's been writing and teaching on the subject of fundraising for a number of years, and she's sharing a topic today, which is a passionate interest to her, and I know she's going to be able to shed a lot of light on it to all of us. So with that, I want to welcome Linda to the stage to say hello.
Thanks, Jay. So it's really great to be here, and I'm looking forward to this. I'm trying to quickly look at the chat room to see where some of the people are from. It looks like we have a nice audience from all over the country, different areas. But so whenever you're ready, I just want to let people know that I have a series of slides that will probably run 20 to 30 minutes, and then after that we'll have open discussion. And as Jay said, we really do want to hear your questions and comments, so that'll be really, really helpful. So whenever you're ready, just give me the go ahead and I'll share my screen.
The stage is yours, Linda. Go right ahead.
Okay. Okay, well, as Jay said, this topic was very interesting to me because I just completed my master's in theological studies from the Franciscan School of Theology at the University of San Diego. And it was very eye-opening to me. And in addition to the book that I will soon have published called Reimagining Philanthropy and Religion, I'm also going to be working on a book based on my thesis for that class, which was Franciscan Spirituality and World Religions. So for both of these books, I've tried to focus on not every religion because there are just way too many in this world. But I think a lot of times people who are working for religious institutions, the one thing they never want to talk about is money. In fact, my own pastor, I happen to be Roman Catholic, and my pastor, maybe a couple months ago, at the end of Mass, not during his homily, because most priests do not like talking about money during their homily, but at the end of Mass, he said, I have an announcement now that is the one thing that priests hate talking about. And I said, money. He said, exactly. because that's one thing that most people in religious circles just hate the thought of talking about money. But I'm hoping that by the end of this session, you'll realize that fundraising is not a dirty word. Sometimes we tend to think it is, and we think, well, people should just give their money to churches and synagogues and mosques and whatever, because it's the natural thing to do. But a lot of times they get really hung up over this and they don't want to talk about money. So I'm here to convince you that it's not a dirty word. So I hope that if nothing else, that's one thing you'll take away from this session. But I think there is a spirituality of fundraising. In fact, some of my inspiration came from, some of you may be familiar with Henri Nouwen. He worked in Canada at Larch, which is an agency that served people with disabilities. And he wrote a book called The Spirituality of Fundraising. And when I read his book, I became very inspired, but I wanted to take his work and take it more from the spiritual and theological and perhaps philosophical road and put it into practical terms for how we do raise money in religious organizations. But I think that fundraising does affect spiritual leaders of all religions, because without money, there is no mission. We've often talked about that phrase in the nonprofit world, and it's very true that if you don't have money, you can't deliver your programs, you can't operate a building. And my church is about 40 years old now, and of course things are starting to go wrong and things happen. You have roof leaks and other things that go on, and you do need to provide for those. But I think the most important thing to me is that spiritual leaders understand their focus is a spiritual leader, but in order to do that, they do need to raise money. So we know that most spiritual leaders really dread fundraising. And believe me, I understand this, because if I were in your position as a faith leader, I would not probably feel as comfortable asking for money as I would in another environment. But I think you have to remember that your main role is to shepherd your flock. And we know that, and we understand that. But the one thing that I think every organization should avoid is kind of begging for money or talking about money all the time. I have talked to many people who have left different churches or synagogues or mosques because they feel like they're always being hit up for money. And the one thing that you don't want to be doing is nickel and diming people. It's good to ask for a substantial amount if people can give that amount. But you should never feel like you're begging for money or talking about money all the time. And your mission and your vision are really the lifeblood of your organization, and that we understand. But I have a good friend who says that money is the oxygen that enables the blood to keep flowing. You know, the mission and the vision are the lifeblood. It's why you exist. It's what your purpose is. But if you don't have money, you don't have that oxygen. And you know that your body can't survive, because if there's no oxygen in there to keep the blood flowing and keep your heart pumping. So the same is true in any religious organization. So I hope that this session and my upcoming book will try to get that through, that yes, you need money, but always remember that that money is going for a good purpose. It's the main purpose of your institution. And if you're the leader of that institution, your main purpose is to shepherd your flock of people and keep them involved in your organization. But at the same time, that can't be done unless you have the money to keep operating. So I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about what some of the main faiths and religions in this world say about philanthropy. And as I said, by far, this does not encompass every religion. There are many, many world religions. And when I write my next book, I'm going to encompass even more of them. But let's just take a look at some of the things that have been said on different fronts. For instance, Buddhism the circle of the way. And Buddhism does usually not seek publicity for charity. If you think that some people really, and there are some people who like name gifts and things like that, but Buddhism practices not seeking that publicity. In fact, the monks often will wear large straw hats, so it kind of obscures their face. And they believe that there's neither a giver or a receiver, only the giving itself is what counts. Whether who receives it, who gives it, isn't really all that important. It's the act of giving can be really, really meaningful in the Buddhist religion. And people are encouraged to give alms, but they believe that the giving actually merits the giver just as much as it does the receiver. And I think this is very true. There was, I forget who it was now, but one of my early lessons that I learned when I entered this field of development was a quote that said, fundraising is the mingling of a joyful giver, a grateful recipient, and an artful asker. And I think that's really true. It takes all of that to make a gift happen. The recipient, of course, is your organization who is grateful for the money, but the donor is joyful. I don't know of anybody who's ever given money to any nonprofit that doesn't feel the joy. And that's one of the things that I think is important, to give the donor that joy of giving. And that really means a lot to the giver, probably even maybe more than it does to the recipient. And in Buddhism, givers are often dedicate the merit of their giving to someone else or to all humanity. It's not giving, oh, I gave a certain amount of money and so I deserve all this praise. That is not at all in the Buddhist philosophy. And I think this is, even if you're not a Buddhist, these are some lessons that I think will be valuable going forward. In Christianity, there's several quotes from, these are from the New Testament. And in Acts, Luke said, in everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work, we must help the weak, remembering the word of Lord Jesus himself, who said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And we've all heard that, I think, and I believe that most of us really believe that. As I said, I don't think I've ever written a check to a charity where I didn't feel good about it. And I believe most donors are like that. And in 1 Peter, he said, each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And we all have different gifts. Some of us have more in the monetary sense. Others can give more of our time and our talent. But all of those things are really critical. And so Christianity does say that a lot of times, the giving is really something that's more meaningful. It's certainly more encouraging and more blessed to give than it is to receive. In Catholicism, I mentioned at the beginning of this Henri Nouwen, who I think that his book is definitely worthwhile reading. So I would recommend you can read his book, and then when my book's available, you can read that one as a kind of a follow-up. But he said some really wise words, I think, about making your case for support when you are asking for money. And he said, we must declare that we have a vision that is amazing and exciting. We are inviting you to invest yourself through the resources that God has given you, your energy, your prayers, and your money in the work to which God has called us. And I really love that quote. And again, maybe you're not Catholic, but I think reading Henri Nouwen's book is true in any religion. All the things that he says are true for almost anyone in any faith-based organizations. And, I think there's a lot of times when people, I don't know if all of you are Facebook followers, but sometimes when I read Facebook, I see some really crazy things, as we all do. And I know there was a little quote circulating: if money is the root of all evil, why do churches ask for money? And I promptly answered this person and said, you're misquoting the Bible. It does not say money is the root of all evil. It says love of money is the root of all evil. So that's a big difference. Is there's a saying that I understand is an old Jewish tradition that says it's not a sin to be wealthy, but it's a sin to die wealthy. So that means that all the wealth that you amass, you're supposed to be using it to do exactly what Henri Nouwen has said, that we have a vision that's amazing and exciting, and many religious organizations do have a vision. It's really exciting, and people want to give to a vision like that. Some other, in Christianity, again, some Protestant sayings, again, we talk about Corinthians 8 and 9, where Paul discusses the Christian duty to provide financial support for the Christians in Jerusalem. And the Lutheran Church, the Missouri Synod, actually has a code of ethical principles and practices regarding fundraising, which I would highly encourage you to look up. I believe you can access it online. But I have worked with many different types of churches, Presbyterians, Methodists, United Brethren, and other Protestant churches, and they really all have a healthy attitude on giving of time, talent, and treasure. So I think if you're saying, oh, well, my faith doesn't believe in fundraising, it probably does, because if you look at all these backgrounds of different nationalities, they do believe in fundraising in different religions. I was especially intrigued by Islam, and they have 5 pillars of Islam. I won't go through all 5 of them, but zakat, which means charity, and the Quran quotes several different instances talking about charity. And what the first one was, those who in charity spend of their goods by night and by day, in secret and in public, have their reward with their Lord. In them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. And I really think that's a beautiful statement. And another quote from the Quran says, kind words and the covering of faults are better than charity followed by injury. Allah is free of all wants, and he is more forbearing. So they mentioned charity, and charity followed by injury means that maybe sometimes people give for the wrong reasons. So what the Quran is encouraging is zakat, and there is a Zakat Foundation of America, which if you're a Muslim, you could certainly are probably familiar with that. But Islam, to be a good Muslim, you're required to give charitably, both while you're living, a percentage of your income, and also after you leave this earth, to leave some money to charity. So Islam has stated that charity is so important that it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and ranking up there with belief in one God, Allah, making a trip to Mecca once a lifetime, praying 5 times a day, and fasting during the month of Ramadan. So charity is really critically important in the Islam faith. And Judaism also, you may be familiar with the Shema prayer. In Leviticus 19, there's a quote that says, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but shall love your neighbor as yourself. And loving your neighbor means that you want to provide for everyone. Loving your neighbor is also very popular, obviously, in Christianity, because Jesus himself quoted Leviticus. And there's also an organization, and this by no means covers all of any of these religions' beliefs, but I'm just giving you some highlights. There's an organization called Shabbat, which supports 5,000 charities globally. I know there's one in my local community that I believe 21 rabbis are involved in this. And this particular group focuses on children with disabilities. I don't know if all of the national ones do. I haven't researched that enough yet, but I just find it interesting that every religion says something about charity. Hinduism, Dana states that charity is held in high regard, and that all living things have an Atman, or a piece of Brahman, within themselves. And Ahisma means that we don't kill or harm any living thing. But the last one really focuses on charity again. Giving while receiving nothing in return is the right thing to do. So every religion has some component that talks about charitable works and how good they are and how much of a part of your spirituality they are. Native American spirituality, which I find extremely fascinating as well. There's a book called Giving in America, and I cannot think of the author right now, but it says giving is not only reciprocal, but it's an honor to give and it's an honor to receive. So that means that when you're giving to someone, you don't want to make them feel like they're not as good as you are because you're able to give them money. But it's an honor to give and it's an honor to receive. I find that was really interesting. And they also believe that giving is a spiritual investment in the protection of future generations. And most Native American spirituality focuses a lot on what are we doing to protect future generations. And in contrast to what we often talk about in the philanthropic world, noblesse oblige, which means that people who have money should be required to give. But in Native American spirituality, it doesn't matter how wealthy you are. Giving is expected of all people, regardless of their social and economic status. And this is really important because I have worked with some organizations that serve people, for example, with disabilities, and the people that they served contributed to them. Maybe it was 50 cents a week, but it was a meaningful donation for those people. So I think that's a really good view on philanthropy, because it doesn't mean that only the wealthy are supposed to give. It means that we're all required to give. So one of the things that I address in my book are the challenges to fundraising in religious organizations. And while I was writing this book, I spoke to rabbis, I spoke to priests, I spoke to ministers. And what I found is that I'm saying many clergy, but my findings are really that most clergy are not trained in things like business and finance and fundraising and human resources. I know I've talked to several ministers and priests that say, they get no training in the seminary. They're focused on theology and pastoral work and things like that, but they really don't get any training in business management or in finance or in fundraising. And I just got invited, in fact, this morning to a seminar on running a church like a business. And they say, we know a church is not a business, but you have to run it like a business. So many clergy people don't really have the training in fundraising. And so they're kind of thrown into the world when all of a sudden they're shepherding a church and haven't been able to take advantage of any training. So I would love to see some training in all seminaries for fundraising and some of these other areas also. And one of the priests I know that I talked to said the good thing in the Catholic Church is very seldom does a priest get ordained and then immediately become a pastor. He's usually serving as an associate pastor somewhere, and they learn from each other. So he said that's how he learned about fundraising when in his years as an associate pastor. But I think it would be great if we can somehow start a movement to get more training for people. And I mentioned this earlier. I think one of the challenges is the misinterpretation of Paul's letter to Timothy, where he says, the love of money is the root of all evil. which means when you're putting money above everything else, those of you who are Christian probably remember the parable that Jesus told about the young man that came and said, what can I do to become your disciple? And Jesus said to him, because he was a wealthy man, go and sell all your possessions and give it to the poor. And he walked away just crushed because he wasn't ready to do that. He wasn't ready to give up everything. And that doesn't mean we all have to give up everything for our churches, but certainly the love of money, when money becomes more important to you than something else, then that is what Paul was referring to when he said the love of money is the root of all evil. So I think that's a challenge to a lot of religious organizations, because they don't want to sound like they're putting too much emphasis on money and the material side when they really want people to grow spiritually. So I'm hoping that after thinking about what we just talked about and the different perspectives on philanthropy, I'd like to ask you some questions that maybe we can discuss during the question and answer session. One is, do you think that your faith background, whatever it might be, encourages philanthropy? And maybe you didn't realize it until this session, I hope. Also, do you think philanthropy will just happen? Do you think that because you have a good cause and a grand vision, that the money is just kind of roll in from heaven? And I met with a group once that was a religious-based group, and they had big needs. I mean, they wanted to do a rather large capital campaign. And I said, well, have you given any thought to how you'll go about raising this money? And they said, oh, yeah, on our knees. And I certainly am not discouraging anyone from praying. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. But it doesn't just happen. It doesn't just fall from the sky without you as a leader and a faith leader doing something to encourage people to give philanthropically and thinking about the joy of philanthropy that the donor is going to experience. And then another question that often comes up is, many people, not just in religious organizations, but I have found this throughout all of my experience in fundraising, that sometimes people view fundraising with that, what I call a tin cup mentality. They think that the best way to raise money is to go out and say, oh, we're this poor nonprofit or this poor church or this poor synagogue, and we really need money. So, and they're kind of like begging on a street corner almost. It's not quite that bad, but I think it's really true that sometimes, people have that mentality that they have to beg for money, and that's not what philanthropy is all about. It's teaching people the joy of philanthropy. And then the final question is, do you really believe that God helps those who help themselves? And this was my answer when I met with that group that said they were going to raise the money on their knees. I said, well, I certainly believe in prayer, and I think it's very important and it can help you. But remember, it also says in Scripture, God helps those who help themselves. So you have to do something proactively to raise money, because it won't just roll in the door. So that's kind of the end of my slide presentation. And I see a lot of things in the chat room. I'm not sure if there are questions or people just letting us know where they are. But Jay, you've probably been monitoring the chat room better than I have.
I have.
Maybe you
I've been
already
monitoring.
have some questions.
Well, in fact, I don't see any questions yet, but I want to invite people to go ahead and participate. And it need not be through questions. It may be through comments. I suspect that the people in the room all come from a variety of faith traditions or exposure to different faith traditions. And it'd be interesting to hear about them. But we do have people in the room, for example, that are from an archdiocese, a rector of an Episcopal church. And that's just a couple that I see right off the top of my head here. So lots of different things. And within the churches themselves, there are various, as you know very well, Linda, different attitudes towards different things, the different interpretations theologically of our current world. And that influences what we are seeking to do programmatically, not just what's happening in terms of worship within these institutions, but also the kinds of fundraising that occurs. And I did see, for example, a Catholic organization that focuses on LGBTQI plus folks. And so in my own world, just because we're all talking about it, I was raised in the Episcopal tradition. I was, raised as an acolyte and the whole thing. My wife was raised in Asia, in a place where there is no discernible faith tradition, but there are the vestiges of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Shintoism are quite strong. So it's interesting to see how these things play out. So that was a lot of preamble, but also an invitation for people to be a part of the conversation. And in fact, I already see a note from Tessa here. I'm not a faith leader, Tessa says, but instead write the appeals for a faith-based organization, and asks, do you have tips on how to include faith-related language in those appeals without using the guilt or the begging model?
Oh, I love that question because, I think I was born and raised in the Lutheran tradition, but I'm now Roman Catholic, and we hear a lot about Catholic guilt. I don't know what faith-based organization you're with, Tessa, but I think it's interesting to include that faith-related language. And I happen to be on the stewardship committee for my church, and we're now getting ready to launch it's not a huge campaign, but in our size of church, it is. It's going to be probably $2.5 million. And we're leading up to this with, between my pastor and myself, we've developed a list of quotes from scripture, and I have some quotes from Henri Nouwen's book that were, in fact, I think it was a quote that I used in this presentation. And we're going to include those in our bulletins every week, just to get people thinking about stewardship and what it means. So I would say that if you have scriptures relating to your faith, somebody else here was a Lutheran who converted to Catholicism. I just saw that pop up. But for Tessa, I think going into your scriptures and looking for quotes, like I had a few from the Quran and a few from the Bible. I think I had some Old Testament there that the Jewish Bible would be using also. And trying to use that kind of language that makes them realize that giving is important. But that begging model, I think what we have to do is create an exciting vision. And I'll just give you some examples for my church. We're doing some typical things that churches need. Like we had 2 air conditioners blow out, and I live in Southern Nevada where the temperature gets to be 115 to 120 degrees sometimes. So you need air conditioners. And that's not a very exciting thing, but people know you need it. But we're also building a prayer garden, and we're doing some renovations to our grounds. We have a beautiful grounds at our church. We have a labyrinth, and now we're building this outdoor prayer garden. And things like that, I think, inspire people because it's something that is going to help people win their faith along with that. So I think, if you can quote some scripture readings and create a strong vision that helps people renew their faith. That's like, we have ministries in our church. For example, we have a Martha's ministry that provides a meal after funerals free of charge to the families that are burying a loved one. And those kind of things, I think, help people renew their faith, but at the same time, it helps the church survive. So I think creating a vision of something that's really exciting and spiritual will help, and quoting from scriptures.
And in fact, Brenda had a follow-up question to that, saying your suggestion of faith-based quotes, would you do that all year? And maybe another way of thinking about that, at least what I thought of as when I read Brenda's comment, was, are there are there kind of moments within the cycle of the year within each of these traditions which have special resonance and where we call out those things by referencing scripture or
Right.
religious text?
And I think for example, for Roman Catholics, during Lent, we believe in prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. So that's a perfect time. In Islam, Ramadan would be very similar. So, and probably every religion has some things associated with it, but I personally think it would be great to do it all year long. If you publish a bulletin for your church or synagogue or mosque or whatever, or you have a website, maybe putting up some quotes periodically on your website. I think it's good to remind people on a year-round basis, but those special times of the year might be appropriate to really do maybe more of an emphasis on that.
Right.
They're great questions.
We have a question from George. This is very important, kind of tactical in nature as well, I think. It seems that some churches rely on events and raffles as fundraisers. How do you address the need for face-to-face solicitation? So it's not this kind of arm's length passing the plate, but it's, it's the real sit down and get to know you.
Well, I am so glad that I didn't see that question come up. It probably disappeared before I got a chance to look at it. But this is one of my real struggles, because I think a lot of people in all religions, this probably is prevalent. And it's also prevalent in the nonprofit sector as a rule. People think of events as a way to raise money, but they don't take into an account that these events, a typical net return on an event is 50% of the gross income. And sadly, in the whole nonprofit world, and I've seen this very much in churches, including my own, where people will say, oh, well, we had this chicken dinner or whatever it was they had, and we made, $10,000, but that's usually what they took in. That's not what they made in profit. And I think it's really important to point out to people, not only the hard costs. For example, you had to buy food, you maybe had to print invitations or flyers or whatever, but then there's soft costs. How much of the church's staff time was spent on getting ready for that event? Because there's always staff time involved in this, and volunteer time. And what I find happening in a lot of faith-based organizations, maybe more so than other nonprofits, is they're having a dinner and they might have 20 volunteers that are cooking and serving the food and whatever. And I actually had an instance where this happened to me, that I was selling tickets for something, and the one woman said, oh, I'm volunteering. I said, oh, that's great. Do you want to buy your ticket to the event now? And she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, no, I'm volunteering, which meant I'm getting a free meal. And I have a friend who but does a lot of volunteer work for a very large archdiocese in this country. And she always has a quote that she says, did they make more than they ate? And sometimes, sadly, that's true. If you have 20 volunteers and they're all eating free, that's another cost to your event. So you didn't really make as much money as you sometimes think you made. So events are fine. To me, I love that our church does a lot of events that are not money makers. We do an ice cream social in the summer that's free of charge, because people that have families can't always come to an event that's $50 or $100 to get into a dinner or something. So we have events that are purely social events. We had a picnic, we had this ice cream social, and I think events are good to cultivate donors and get them thinking about what's happening. But if you do an event every month, I guarantee your volunteers are going to be worn out in no time. Your staff is going to be worn out, and it's going to end up costing you money, because people then feel like, oh my gosh, I'm being nickel and dimed. This month they're doing a raffle. This month some places have bingos and whatever else they might be doing. And after a while, people get really tired of, they feel like they're being hounded for money. So I think it's much better to develop like right now for my church, we're putting together a committee of people that are going to go out and see the potential major donors in our congregation and ask them for a gift to some of our capital needs, but also ask them to increase their monthly giving, and also ask them to consider a planned gift. Planned giving is really important, I think, in religious institutions, because it's probably the one institution that people who attend churches or synagogues or whatever, they're probably closer to their religious organization than they are even to the university that they only went there 4 years or 6 years or whatever. But the church is something that they go every week for many people, and it's a natural for planned gifts. So we have an estate planning attorney in our parish, and we're going to invite him to come and do a seminar for people and encourage them to leave planned gifts for the church as well. So all of those things, I think, are so much more productive than special events. And if somebody wants to email me, I have a special event analysis form that is usually an eye-opener for people when they see, oh, gee whiz, this thing really, we forgot about deducting the cost of staff time and everything else from the event. So if anybody would like that, I'll be happy to send it to you.
Linda, what's your email address? We'll put that in the chat. So people can see that.
It's linda@lindalysakowski.com.
Okay, and I'm sure Jack can put that in while we're talking. Linda, I wanted to follow up on that special event question because I completely agree with you about events. On the other hand, there are a lot of churches and other kind of traditional institutional faith traditions where they've seen declining populations.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them. Non-denominational churches, for example, in the Christian faith have gone gangbusters in the last few years.
Right.
But if you go into a Protestant church that's been around for a couple hundred years, you might find a thinner congregation. That's true for other things too. It may be true for synagogues, et cetera. I wonder if events are also a way to bring in new populations that you can get to know and then invite to participate in the planned giving program over time, or other kinds of things that you might be doing that are more personal.
I think that's a great idea. In fact, my church we didn't just start it. We had it years ago, but it wasn't at the level we're doing it now. We have a welcoming committee, and we have a list of all the new members who join our church. And we have a team of about 20 people, and it's a small church. We only have about 200 and some people who attend Mass every weekend. But we are initiating this welcome committee who is going out to all the new members. They will call them, offer to meet with them. We have a social hour after every Mass. We have coffee and donuts on Sunday morning. So we'll be inviting them to come to that. And somebody made this, I thought, great suggestion that we have, and I think every church or synagogue, no matter where you go, I think there's always cliques of people that sit together and they don't go out and talk to new people. So we're determined to change that. And one woman suggested, I love this idea. She said, at our coffee and donuts, we're going to have one table set aside called the Table of Plenty. And there'll be 1 or 2 people from our welcoming committee sitting there. But it's a place where new members can come and sit, because some people have said they actually were told when they went over for coffee and donuts, oh, you can't sit there, I'm saving that seat for so-and-so.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't a good feeling. I mean, who would be welcome in a church like that? So we're trying our best to do as much as we can to welcome people and to make them feel that they're a part of it. We're giving them a list of ministries that they could get involved in. And it's really starting to work, because we're seeing people come in, and young people willing to serve the church as lectors and different things like that. So we're really trying to get new people especially involved. But I said, there's probably also people who have been coming there for years that still don't feel like they're a part of the group, and there is no the group, but it's perceived that way by a lot of people. So I think having events where you can get people to mix and mingle and get to know each other. And our pastor is really good at welcoming people because he stands up every Sunday and says who's new and who's just visiting for the week or something like that. And he's having different meetings. Like one Sunday he had coffee and donuts in the rectory because most people have never go into the rectory where the priest lives. That's like their private territory. And he wants to really welcome people. So I think having the leader of the church being a welcoming person is a big part of that. But I think having events where maybe you even almost force people to just sit and talk to somebody new. I kind of joked that we should give everybody a number when they come in, and that's the table they have to sit at, and that would really shake them up. But then we decided nobody would come to coffee and donuts if we did that. But I think there are ways that you can do events specifically designed for the, and have somebody call the new people and say, hey, are you going to our spaghetti dinner next week or whatever? Well, you're welcome to sit with me. And that I think is really, really critical.
We have a note from Brenda here just saying that last year they asked individuals to come forward during the services to speak on what St. Luke's means to them and why the pledge. So I guess in this case, we're talking about St. Luke's, the institution. And so this is something that is transferable to other contexts, other institutions for that matter, other nonprofits. And it's rare that we invite people to do that, but it's pretty powerful to give testimony.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. And I think I said in the beginning that one day my pastor got up and he said, I have to talk about something no priest likes to talk about, and that's money. But having members of the congregation, I know I had a pastor that invited me to offer reflections after the gospel and to talk about philanthropy and what it meant and why I give to the church. And I think that's a wonderful idea, Brenda, because people don't want to always hear their leader. And some leaders are really uncomfortable talking about money, but get some of the people that are members of your congregation to come up and say, this is why I joined this church. And I joined the church I belonged to when I lived, like 40 miles away, but I loved the church because it was small and I felt it was very welcoming. So having people get up and give witness to that, lay people, I think is really, really, that's a great suggestion. I'm glad you raised that, Brenda, because I think it definitely does work.
I wanted to ask you as a follow-up to that, Linda, if there are settings where a member of the clergy, again, in any of these faith traditions, even if they're not a skilled fundraiser per se, that they can be a good natural partner, especially in a capital campaign context, whether it's for the institution of worship or whether it's for another cause. Are there times that you've seen people kind of come together with someone and then go out and do that work, whether it's for, let's say, shelter for the homeless or for a pantry or any other thing where someone can speak to that person's internal faith kind of compass, and then the other person could talk to program and financial need?
Right. And I think it's very similar in what happens in any institution. I know when I worked for a university, it happened to be a faith-based university, but a lot of times the chief executive officer of the organization, which in case of a religious organization, it's going to be a clergy person, but to go as a team where that person can talk about the vision and the excitement, and then maybe the other person is the one who introduces and say, I really believe in this church, synagogue, whatever, and I'm contributing to this campaign because I think it's so important. And that relieves the clergy person from being the one to make the ask. But on the other hand, I think there are some people who respond better to clergy people. So if the pastor or somebody comes and asks them for a gift, they feel maybe it's a sense of importance that it's the CEO. And I know pastors don't think of themselves as a CEO usually, but technically that's what they are. And some people do feel more inclined to give if the pastor would ask them.
Does it help to then train that person a little bit? I mean, let's say as a
Yeah.
consultant, you've been probably in that role, and I've worked
Mhm.
on some church campaigns and things like that. And it seems like some people will do it, but they would benefit from some indoctrination themselves
Right,
so that they don't overstep. They don't go in and talk to someone and who really is in need of pastoral counseling and then
right,
switch to money.
right.
Or something of that nature, that they can put it in the proper context about the
Mhm.
importance of the project to the institution.
Yeah, I think that's really critical because, you know, people have different needs at different times. And certainly if they call a pastor to come and talk to them when they're in need of counseling, they don't want to hear about money. But I also think that the the person that's going to be the pastor, the imam, the
Mhm.
rabbi, or whoever is the lead person, they often do need some training because, as I said, they don't get much training in preparation. At least none of the clergy people I talked to said they got a lot of training in this. So I think it's working as a team. And if they have somebody, a consultant or somebody to train them and say, this is how you make an ask and this is how you answer objections. And people will often say, I want to think about it, pray about it, talk to my financial advisor. How they respond to those different responses, I think really is important. So whoever the leader is, they have to be, I hate to use the word trainable, but I think that's the only word that describes it. They have to understand that that's not their area of expertise. I would certainly not go in and want to counsel a couple who was thinking about getting a divorce because I'm not trained to do that, but I am trained to go in and ask them for money. So I think those kind of things are really important, that everybody works as a team. And
Right, right.
I'm very blessed with my pastor because he said at one of the meetings that we were talking about raising this money, and he said, well, I'm not a fundraiser. And somebody said, oh, yes, you are. And he is really good at it. But he said, yes, but I'm not a certified fundraiser like Linda is. So it means he doesn't know the techniques, but he's good at it instinctively. And he
Right.
has a good way of presenting it.
Linda, I'm glad you mentioned imams again, because I know we've spoken a lot about this in the context of the Christian church, but and maybe many in the audience are coming from that lens. But you said something earlier that bears repeating, which is that in Islam, according to Islamic finance law, I think it's 2.5% of a person's wealth must be given every year.
Right.
And that means that it's more than, I think the last figure I saw, and I'm sure this is an undercount, was over $500 billion worldwide. And so there's a lot there. And sometimes this stuff is also invisible, like it is with all those people making contributions at temples throughout Asia, where I saw a lot of coins dropping a few weeks ago at Kiyomizu-dera. I can tell you. So there were a lot of people doing their prayers. And I guess my real point is, sometimes it's visible, sometimes it's not. And I have a question for you, which is, how do we gently ask, find a way so that people will naturally talk about the importance of faith in their life, so we can meet them where they are? So we're not throwing quotes at them or talking to them about faith from our perspective, but we're helping them to talk about the importance of philanthropy from their faith tradition.
I think that's really a great comment, because I think it is important for people to understand that it's your faith that motivates you to want to share with others, whether you're sharing. And our stewardship council made this very clear when we started, that we were talking about time, talent, and treasure. And we know that some people are not going to have the money to give at the same level other people are, but we still value their contributions. And I mean, we have a woman in our church who is, I think, 89, and she's on oxygen 24/7, carries it with her everywhere. But this woman is incredible. She will call new people who are joining our church. She's on our welcoming committee. She'll call people just to check up on them. During COVID, we had a whole prayer chain because we weren't meeting in person. And people would call and say, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Is there anything you need from the church? And people really shared their faith with each other. And we have a couple of faith sharing groups that don't talk about money at all. It's just strictly to share their faith with each other. And I think that's really important because that's what brings out the spirit of charity in you. And the Muslims that I know aren't charitable because they're required to do it, even though it is part of being a good Muslim.
Yeah, thank you.
But
yeah.
they're doing it because, like my one friend, she said, I really care about orphans. That's my, and you're not required to give to any particular charity. It's just, you have to give that 2.5%. And so her thing is she has a passion for orphans. So that's what she'll give to. And I think it's more, it's the faith that motivates you to give, not the other way around.
Right.
Giving doesn't necessarily strengthen your faith. Maybe it will, I guess, for some people. But I think if you don't have that faith in you first, you're not going to want to give. And that's why some of the comments that people have made about things that they've done, like getting up and sharing their faith in front of the whole congregation, is really, really critical.
Well, Linda, I know we're coming up on the hour, so I just want to thank you for this. And I want to invite you to, share again how people can learn about your book and follow you, because you're doing a lot of work in lots of areas of fundraising, but this is the one that's particularly important to you right now. How can people find out more?
Okay, well, my website is very easy also. It's just www.lysakowski.com. And I have, my book is featured on that website, even though it's not available yet, but you'll be able, and I don't know if you can pre-order it. I have to check into that. That's a good question. But also I have another website where I offer courses, and I have a course. I just developed a course based on this book. The course is out right now. It's, I forget how many hours, but they're all approved for CFRE credits. And that website is learnwithlinda.online. So you can take a full course in this topic.
And Jack, as usual, is typing it faster than I could.
Yeah.
So if you're here with us live, you'll find them in the chat. And if not, if you're watching this afterwards, those are two ways you can learn more about Linda and her work. And if you want to see the rest of her books, you can probably find out a lot about them there, or you can do what I did and go to Amazon. There are a lot of them there, so get ready to build your library. Thank you, Linda, for sharing some of this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to wish everybody much success, because I know it seems like most of the people I've seen in the chat room are with Catholic organizations, but no matter what religion you are, I am a person who is really open to all religions, and I think they all have a lot to contribute. And I know that every one of you is contributing a lot to your community. And if you can learn to do even more fundraising more effectively, that's going to allow you to do the good work that you do and continue that for a long, long time to come.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that and for everything here. And we're already getting the additional thanks from the crowd here. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And I know Linda does. I also want to invite people to join us again on Thursday. We have Emily Heck joining us to talk about planning your marketing campaign for your giving days. If you have a plan to have a giving day this year, don't just wing it. Don't wait until October, or God forbid, and it's appropriate here, November. Have a plan. Emily will show you how to do it. That's Thursday at 3:30 p.m. And if you're interested in hearing more about the lives of people and their work, you'll find our podcast, and it's an interesting place to listen. In fact, Linda has an episode there talking about her life, and we have all the recent AFP award winners there, as well as many of the CNN heroes. I'm sure you'll enjoy all of that. So with that, I want to thank you all for hanging out with us. and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, take care. Thank you, Linda.
Bye.